Secretary Flora, welcome.
Thanks, Joe. Thanks, everyone. Big thank you to you all for being here, because I know the work you do is really, really hard, and I totally appreciate it. Appreciate the time that our staff put in, the volunteers, and everyone else. And I am thrilled to be here. This is the first time. What a spectacular venue. I live on the Eastern Shore, but I have never made my way here, so how incredible. So I know I'm between you and lunch, so I want to try to make this as interesting, maybe provocative as possible, and really think about the future. I know there was a lot of good discussion this morning. I really appreciated the questions, I think the thought, the issues everyone's struggling with in different ways, in different forms, in different scales, and it was really tremendous. Also just listened to the one on the churches. Fabulous information there. It happens that the Maryland Historic Trust is actually under the Maryland Department of Planning as an agency, in case you didn't know that. In fact, about half of our agency is the Maryland Historic Trust, which is also part of my umbrella. So it's really interesting to see that these incredible structures thinking creatively about how to keep them rooted in neighborhoods and allow them to evolve over time. I want to just share with you a little bit about planning, how we all came to planning. First of all, let me get a sense of who's in the room. You may have already done this earlier, and I apologize if you did, but help me out. How many of you consider yourself volunteer planners? In some shape, form, or another. Okay, how many of you actually are planning commission members in the room? Thank you so much. I know you get coerced, bullied, thrown information, put into these positions, and it's got to be a labor of love for your community and for this discipline, so thank you. How many of you are working in government planning in some manner as a planning practitioner? Okay. And how many of you are AICP? Great. That's really great. That's wonderful. Thank you. I just wanted to get a sense. It's so fun to be in a room with planners, people of my kind. So that's really good. So just to share with you a little bit more about planning and how I came into the planning. It's kind of great to have a planning agency run by a planner. But I came into this, people kind of wonder, how did you end up being secretary? First of all, I'm a big fan of Governor Moore, but I did not even know Governor Moore until I heard him speak, actually, in Cambridge. And I was pretty taken by a lot of his values, so much so that I brought home a yard sign. And when he won in November, I said, I think I really want to be part of this. I was doing consulting work at the time, had my own small company running large-scale development projects. So I put my name in the transition portal, just cold call, 3,000 resumes into the transition portal in November. December 28th, I got a call and said, you're a finalist for Secretary of Planning. Can you be in Baltimore tomorrow? Sure, I can be there. And then a couple of weeks later, I found myself at the inauguration, interviewed with Governor Moore in the process, and found myself running the wonderful Department of Planning. And I want to just say a moment about that and share that story, because the governor, and this is not about a political campaign, it's just a little about how we're running government right now. The governor was incredibly committed to hiring qualified people who actually come from the practice. Whether it be the aging department we just talked about, or environment or transportation, all of the cabinet comes from actually worked in their area, not someone who made big donations necessarily. We have a fabulous cabinet. I love it. We all work together collaboratively. It's kind of foreign for people because we actually talk to each other. And planning's one of those disciplines that is horizontal. We have to work horizontally. We're not just about environment or just about housing or just about transportation. And that's what makes my job fun and incredibly hard at the same time, because we actually cut across all of the agencies, and that's what our comprehensive plans try to do. I'm going to circle back to comp plans in a minute. But with that, I think it's a lot of why I was selected, because not only have I lived in rural, urban, suburban, across those things, lived experiences, I've also been a nonprofit and a private sector developer. I get pro formas. I get the fact that there is a way to do good development and bad development. I've done master planning, sustainability planning, resiliency planning in states around the country and globally as a consultant, and worked in the nonprofit. It was at the front end of green building when that was getting done. But the really fun thing is I started out as an intern in a county planning office in upstate New York, and decided this was a direction I wanted to go in. So enough about me, but it's more about how do you get to this place? How did you? What was your path? What was your journey that decided you to get somehow engaged in planning, whether that be professionally, you know, as a professional planner, or decide to commit a lot of your time to planning in the Planning Commission, for instance, or as another type of volunteer planner. What was that path that led you there? Don't lose sight of that path. Don't lose sight of that journey you're on and why you're there. I think it's just really, really important in what we do. But I want to come back to comp plans, and I'm probably going to jump around, and I apologize in advance for that. How many people love doing comprehensive planning? How many people think comprehensive planning has become just this incredible chore that's forced upon them every few years? Yeah. Not surprising. There's a lot of hands that weren't raised either. What I am going to challenge this group with is the fact that we are living in such a fast-changing world right now. Market transformation, disruptors, things that are going on around us faster than comp plans can keep up with. And we've got to change the model. And I heard some of that in some of the earlier remarks, but what is adaptive planning? What is visualization and how we really think about what it is we want, rather than regulations so deep and so complicated that nobody can understand them and everybody has to hire an attorney to really understand how to wade through the process? How do we change that? I don't have all the answers, but I think it's time we start asking the questions and being bold enough to ask the questions. So what would adaptive planning look like? I mean, we know we've done some things in the world of form-based codes and things like that, but how do we get to a point where planning and zoning aren't used as purposeful barriers and ways to stop versus ways to move towards something that can be positive? How do we get to a point where the loudest voice in the room that basically has time to show up becomes who leads the outcome versus all the voices that don't have time to come to the meeting or be in the room? How do we find that balance? I think particularly to the planning commissioners, you're not going to make everybody happy, and you know that. And you're probably not going to make everybody happy who's in the room, because those are the people that actually have the time to show up, and they don't represent the majority usually. And so we do have a lot of challenges. So let me share with you a little bit about what I am trying. It's going to take a lot of help. We need partners, but some of what we're trying to do at the Maryland Department of Planning. First of all, I have to acknowledge Joe, who's out there. Thank you, Joe, for leading all of this today. Great job, everybody, and the whole team that he acknowledged earlier. The thing I am so grateful for is that when I walked into the agency, I inherited an amazing group of people who are so committed and passionate about this work. But that group of people has been so bogged down in old statutes, old requirements, things that take so much time that it doesn't allow us to be creative and get out front and be leaders. So this is where we're trying to get to. Three key things. One is around regionalism. None of us in every little piece of every little corner of Maryland has the money, the resources, the time to do everything by ourselves. We have to start thinking about regions. One size doesn't fit all. I absolutely agree with that. And Maryland is so diverse in so many ways in terms of its geography, its culture, you know, the economies. Everything is so vastly different. And so we won't have one size fits all. I am not aware of any mandates, you know, that are keeping you from doing what you want to do in your communities. But we do need to think, I think, as regions, because there's an economies of scales issue. There's just not enough money. The GDP is not growing in the state of Maryland right now. Our number one focus right now is to try to grow the economy, but grow it in a reasonable, sustainable manner. So at the Maryland Department of Planning, first of all, what I'm trying to do is figure out and prioritize what we're doing, what we've been doing because we always did it that way, or because the statute says so that was written 20 years ago. Get some of that off our plate, and that's a tough, long process, and turn to where we think we can have more value. We actually only have 20 to 30 planners inside of 140 some employees at the state of Maryland Planning. That's not a lot. So we have to be incredibly efficient with where we can be of most value. So regionalism, you're going to hear a lot about that. Visualization, what does that mean? I want to transform loads and loads of text into more visual. Storyboards, pictures, scenarios. If you put 3 scenarios or 3 pictures in front of somebody, if this is what you like or don't like, I can guarantee you in many cases they will pick the same thing. If you were to write, you know, pages and pages of zoning code about what that reflects, they'll just glaze over and not really quite understand that. So how can we take advantage of some of the technology, some of these amazing new students coming out of grad school and out of technical schools, to use visualization tools and techniques in a much bigger, better way, and to make planning and zoning more accessible to all. You shouldn't have to hire an attorney to figure out what your zoning code says. So how do we interpret that? How do we translate it? How can Maryland State Department of Planning help with that? That's an area that we really want to grow in terms of our GIS, our geospatial data analysis type folks, our folks that can really help with that translation. The third area is data. We actually house the State Data Center, which is quite fascinating as someone who's a little bit of a data geek. And that basically our partnership is with the U.S. Census. So I get to sign the agreement with the U.S. Census to sort of say, not only conducting the census, but then what do we do with all of that data when it's done? How do we make projections? How do we deal with what's going on in the school districts? How do we really look at communities in terms of where they're growing, where they want to grow? Do they want to stagnate? Okay. But where does data start in informing better decisions? And I want to say not drive the decision, but inform the decision. We know that there's also on-the-ground knowledge. There's also, you know, just what's happening today that even the census data, by the time we get it, could be old. Look at what COVID did to us. Let's stop a minute and think about COVID. There are things that happened that were accelerators, amplifiers of things that were already happening, whether it be Amazon, you know, Zoom, work from home, telework, you know, you name it. There has been so many big changes that none of us could have estimated. And that was a disruptor that no one anticipated. The other disruptors that I think are incredible, someone warned me about electric scooters many years ago. They said, boy, they're coming and they're gonna come fast and they are gonna take over the streets, and boy, they are. But it's like, what's going on out there in the market? We can't think about today, we have to think about as, I grew up in a hockey area where the puck's going, according to Gretzky. We gotta think about where it's going. And past trends don't necessarily reflect future projections anymore. So how do we use data with all of that? How do we really understand that? And then you have planning departments or governments that don't even have a planner. to help you with all of that. So all of that comes on many of you directly. So regionalism, visualization, data, those are going to be big for our agency as we begin to transform the agency, to get out from under, quite frankly, the bureaucracy, the things that are bogging my small team down, and be able to get out in front and help be a leader and help you all. Because the things that we can do can then hopefully make it easier for you if we can do it in a way that we can actually create tools and things that'll help you. The other thing that I really want to share with you is just this whole thing of what you're doing today, education. How do we learn from best practices? We don't have the time, the money, once again, to reinvent the wheel over and over and over again. So as far as the Department of Planning is concerned, we have to form partnerships with, education institutions, with associations, MACO, MML, Maryland, American Planning Association, you all, many others, and really understand, pick our battles, first of all, understand what are the big issues, and what do we need to be doing to help with professional development and education. I would like to see us doing more of that. The couple of things that we'll be doing is we're working with the Maryland National Center for Smart Growth, planning a conference for next year. I want to get us back to doing roundtables and forums on a regional scale. We need to hear what's going on. I can't hear that in Baltimore. We have to get out there on a regional scale. Keep in mind, we have to think regionalism because we can't solve every little problem, but I bet you'll find out there's a lot of common ones that we can tackle better together. So we'll be doing more of that type of activity going into next year. The Smart Growth Subcabinet. How many are you aware of the Smart Growth Subcabinet? A few of you. Okay. So for those of you who aren't, Smart Growth Subcabinet was created back in early 2000s by Governor Glendening, back when smart growth was sort of the big movement nationally. The subcabinet has languished since then. And we're trying to re-envision it, really understand, because it is a forum where, at this point in time, I believe it's at least 13, possibly 14 in the future, cabinet-level secretaries come together, and it's our best opportunity to figure out ways to collaborate. So I'm trying to re-envision it, reactivate it, create this forum where all these cabinet secretaries are coming together and helping to make decisions that are actually more collaborative and looking forward. And so that's something, we have our next public meeting, which will be virtual, so everybody has access, on December 1st, so stay tuned for that. That'll be coming out of our office if you get our newsletter, of where you can sign up and get involved in that. So those are a few upcoming things that I wanted to share with you. I think the other thing is just, so it's sort of like we have these national, global disruptors that are out of our control, whether they be natural disasters or social or economies, all of these things happening up here. We can't control that. We have our state, new administration, the work we're doing to try to figure out, well, what do we as a state have to address collectively? And what do we need to address on the ground, in ways that are going to be different from the Eastern Shore, even the lower and upper Eastern Shore, Western Maryland, Central Maryland, Southern, Baltimore. Everybody's got differentials, but we're all dealing with housing, either too much or not enough. We're all dealing with transportation and the microtransit issues and commuting and workers. We're all dealing with issues of equity in terms of people wonder, oh, I can't hire anybody to work in my restaurant. Well, guess what? They can't afford to live in your community and they can't make enough to live on. So all these things interconnect. I think you all get that, but how do we help others get it? How do we connect the dots for others to start realizing that if you do this, that's going to have a domino effect that means that your Main Street's not going to work, you're not going to be able to get people here, and you're going to have a problem in the future because eventually either your community will age out and not exist, or your community will have explosive growth, and we can't get out in front of that and no one will want to be there again because they can't even get there. So I'm rambling a little bit on that, but I really want to sort of think of that, those macro things that maybe you can't control, the state things that we're working hard and we want to hear from you and we want to engage with you through these roundtables and things that we'll be doing next year. And then pick your battles at the local level. Really try to understand, you know, the must, shall versus the shoulds. You know, what is guidance? What is regulatory? I love Mitchell. Mitchell, you still here? There you are. There you are, Mitchell. You remember me, Mitchell? I was on the other side of the table with Mitchell. You don't think I was going to get out of the room without that comment. As a developer, Mitchell was on the Planning Commission. I love what you said, though. Like, you can get caught up in the chaos of all of the things that you're trying to absorb as a Planning Commission member, or you can step back and say, what makes good sense? You know, just think logically for a moment. Does this make good sense for our community? And then, well, how do we find a path to get there? You know, just because there is a barrier doesn't mean it's the right barrier. So I would challenge all of you to actually do some of what Mitchell was saying, is step back. Don't get caught up in the chaos that is created by legacy or created by too much regulation, and step back and think, what makes sense? Does this feel like it could be something good for our community? Well, then how do we help to work there? And I would also encourage you to collaborate. Betterton, doing a comp plan, that might not make sense. How do we look at the statute that says that everybody should do a comp plan? I'm going to stand here and say that might not make sense. You know, how do we really look at some of these dated policies and either amend, sunset, maybe communities of certain sizes, under a certain size that don't have a planner, don't have technical support, don't have funding. We need to think differently about how we do those things. So if anything, and it looks like lunch is ready, I would say, you know, as a final thought, and I'll be here. I'm going to stay around for a little bit this afternoon, so I'm happy to take questions later. Just again, thank you for your service, for what you're doing. I think planning is one of the most talked about and understood professions out there. My parents don't even know what I've been doing. I've been doing this for 40 years. They still can't figure it out. If I said it was an architect or it was a pilot, my brother, they'd be, oh, yeah, I get that. So our work is so important. We are the collaborators. We are the facilitators. We are the people who can connect the dots. We are the people who can step back and say, what makes sense? Just because somebody wrote something 10 years ago, and you may not have known their intentions, and it's getting in the way of what makes sense, let's make sure we just don't let everything come to a halting stop because of that. And I think it's really up to us to be the voice of reason. I could go on all afternoon, but I will save you from that, and we will have lunch. But feel free to reach out to me or catch Joe or one of the staff here if we can do any follow-up. So thank you all.